Hey guys, this is Marty, and this is part one of a two-part series featuring Stefan Lohrer, who represents Caran.
All right, good evening, everybody. So, I'm Stefan Lohrer, and I came here from, I work for Creative Art Materials. I'm the national sales manager for the United States and Canada, and I work with Sue. Sue is the rep up here in the Midwest. And anyway, I'm originally from Switzerland myself, and I worked with the previous importer, Caran of Switzerland, which were actually my parents. I had to work with my parents for yeah, and the company was sold to Creative Chemical Solutions on April 1st, what was that, 2008? Yeah, 2008, April 1st, 2008. And it became Creative Art Materials at that time, and I was in New York and stayed there for about a year, and then moved down to Florida, which is where I live now. And so that's my main office. Creative Art Materials is out in North Carolina, and we're going to talk today about Caran products specifically. The pigments that we use are all German and Swiss pigments, which are made in an equally environmentally responsible manner. They're also much higher quality and much more light fast. When you make pencils, there's an enormous amount of sawdust and wood shavings. We actually compress them to heat the factory in the winter. And the water we use from Lake Geneva for various production purposes gets filtered before it goes back into the lakes. And while we're talking about safety, all of our products conform to CE, which stands for Conform Europa, which is the strictest standard in the world for heavy metals and toxins. It's the European standard for children's toys. And the acceptable levels of toxins and heavy metals are far lower than our own CPSIA, Consumer Product Safety Improvement Act. So that's what we go by CE. It's a very safe product. Most of our products are also AP approved. We don't use any nanoparticles, anything we make. Nanoparticles are very finely ground particles that could be absorbed through mucous membrane or your eyes and things like that. Even like our chalk pastels and our chalk is very low dust. We'll start off with graphite. What exactly is graphite? Does anybody know exactly what graphite is? Graphite is a mineral that's in the carbon family, right? And it's ground up and mixed with clay and then fired to become a ceramic. Right? And you know that there are different hardnesses of graphite. You've all used different hardnesses of graphite, right? An HB, which would be the equivalent of the number 2 in the, that you used as a kid when you used school pencils, right? And then, as when you go higher up in the Bs, that stands for blackness. The higher up you go in the Bs, the blacker they are, the softer they are. When you get up to the H's, right? The higher up you go in the H's, the harder they are, and they become more lighter. So let's say, how does that work? Let's say we have a big pile of graphite, right? That's been ground up, right? And you add a little bit of clay, right? Mix it up and fire it. And so you probably get like a 9B pencil, which is about the softest they get. In fact, most people don't even make a 9B pencil because there's very little clay to bind it and hold it together, so they fall apart. Well, we'll tell you how we do that in a minute. And then as you continually add more and more clay to the formula, right, to the mix, right, 3 things are occurring. One is it's getting stronger because the clay also serves as a binder, right? It's getting harder because that's what clay does. Makes it harder. But you're also diluting that graphite with the clay, which is why it's getting lighter, right? Does that make sense to everybody, right? So it goes from 9B to 8B, 7B, 6B, down to an H, B, and F, and then into the B's, down to the H's, right? And so it's like it follows the scale, but it's all basically achieved by continuing to add clay to the formula. And then what we do at Caran is after they're fired and everything, we fine-tune them with waxes to get it even closer in consistency. After the graphite is fired, we soak them in synthetic waxes. Now here's where it starts to get interesting. Up till this point, we'd be getting maybe a little too technical, but I really wanted you to understand about graphite. What we're going to talk about now with colored pencils and everything else, all what you just learned is going to kind of make sense now. we get pretty close to the hardness of the graphite that we want by mixing the correct proportion of clay and various graphites, you know, to get the hardness. But then we fine tune it. The waxes will by soaking them in the waxes, we'll fine tune that hardness to make sure that it's absolutely consistent from batch to batch. Because graphite is a natural material and so is clay. And even if it comes from the same place, it's going to vary slightly from batch to batch. But what the wax also does, it determines whether that graphite pencil will be water soluble or water resistant. Because graphite and pigments are never water soluble, right? If I rub graphite on here, it's going on here by friction, right? Or I'm burnishing it into the paper. However, if I put graphite on a palette, right? Now I could just as soon do this on a piece of paper and I would achieve the same result. The only thing is that if I choose to do it on paper, a lot of the graphite would get soaked into the paper and I would be able to harvest it. So here I get a much higher yield by using a little palette, right? But now I can do this nice wash. See, and so now what's going on is that liquid, that synthetic wax that's water soluble is being dissolved and dispersing that graphite. Just like if I'm using a watercolor pencils, or, you know, like watercolor pencils. It's not the pigments that are soluble. The pigments are just mixed with honey or sometimes some gum arabic, which is a type of tree sap, and you're hitting it with a brush and you're dissolving that honey and then basically smearing that liquid honey on the paper that's saturated with pigments. That's what's going on, right?
So
it's the same thing.
Sorry, is the wax just a coating on the outside?
It does soak in.
It does?
Because when we make a water, and I'm glad you said that. It's almost if I paid you to say that. Because if we're making a water-soluble graphite pencil, we also add a plant-based binder, which is, by the way, non-allergenic. And we do that so to make it more porous. And we fire it at 200 degrees Celsius lower temperature. So it'll be fired at 800 instead of 1,000 degrees. And that way we're not burning up that binder completely. I mean, that plant-based filler. And that makes it more porous so that it'll absorb more waxes. Now, then all of our pencils are then glued the entire length, of course, right? And they're basically made like they're two little boards of wood about as big as one of these sets, maybe a little bit smaller, right? And they have grooves routed out in them, and then they glue the entire length. They put the cores in them. They put the other one on top, and then they go in a press in a vise, right, until they're dried, and then they go through a router, and they come out halfway cut, and then flip it over, and they go through, and it cuts cut the other way. If you're ever interested in seeing how this is done, you can go on YouTube. There's a video called "How It's Made: Color Pencils," and that show used to be a show that used to air on TV. That particular episode was actually done at the Caran factory. So you can actually see all these things that I'm talking about and watch it in the video to see the actual production. So we make several watercolor pencils. We make Museum, which is a watercolor pencil, and we make Supercolor. These are both watercolor pencils, however, they're very different. We're going to get into that. We make a lot more different watercolor ones, but we're talking about artist grade right now. We're not going to talk about student grade or anything like that. That's, colored pencils are very challenging to manufacture and to make a good quality product. And how many of you guys use color pencils? Okay, quite a few of you. All right, so maybe you can relate to some of these issues that are known to occur with colored pencils, aside from the fact that the cores come out. So a lot of times, a lot of pencils bloom. What that means is that when you put a lot of layers down, you have a white sheen that develops on the surface. And as time goes on, it gets worse. What's going on there is the waxes are coming to the surface, and they oxidize, very much like bronze would develop a green patina when it oxidizes. You know what I'm talking about? Right? So this is what's going on, and it's because the chemist isn't particularly paying enough attention to which waxes are compatible with which pigments, right? Or how they're infused into the pencil. Another thing that's a common problem with colored pencils, colors maybe not very vibrant. Batch to batch consistency can be quite terrible, where you run out of a purple or a green or something like that, and you go to replace that color mid-project and it may be a few shades off. The hardness can be uneven because different pigments have different textures. Yellow is a very hard pigment, red is a very creamy pigment, and then you've got everything in between, so every time you lay down a pencil, it's going to feel different from the previous one. Blends don't come out very nice sometimes with color pencils, where you get a lot of unwanted browns and grays. So there's a lot of things that issues with color pencils. So here's how we get over some of these, okay? As far as the brightness of the vividness of the colors themselves, the batch consistency, and the blending, it's all the same basic problem. What that problem is that what the manufacturers are doing is to make 120 colors, they're using between 13 and 18 pigments, and they keep blending them until they get all the colors in the color spectrum that they're trying to present, right? So with that much blending going on, it's very hard to do it exactly the same way twice, and you don't have a lot of colors that have one pigment in it. So so the colors get to be a little bit distorted. They're not very vibrant, they don't blend very well, batch to batch consistency is very good. So because we use 3 times as many different pigments, up to 50 different pigments in one assortment, there are much more mono pigments, so it's much more expensive to do it that way, and they're all German and Swiss high quality pigments. But what you end up with is truer colors, more consistent from batch to batch, and they blend a lot nicer. As far as the hardness goes, now we're getting to something that's a real pain in the old from a production standpoint. Because basically what's going on with the other brands is there are 4 basic ingredients to making a color pencil, right? You have your pigment, or blend of pigments, right? You have your fillers, you have your binders, which hold them together, and you have the waxes to soften them up a little bit, right? Right? You with me so far, right? Now, the fillers, they could be good fillers or bad fillers. Let me explain. We never use the fillers unless that filler is going to improve that color. Like some pigments, for example, are a little bit too translucent for our liking. So we may add some titanium oxide or something to give that particular color some more opacity, right? That would be a good filler because it's meant to improve that particular color for that pencil, right? But a bad filler would be like putting flour in there so you can get away with using less pigment, right? That would be an undesirable filler. You with me, right? So we don't use fillers unless they're actually going to do some good for that particular color, all right? So, but let's say, so you have these 4 ingredients, and the only variable in that ingredient is the blend of pigments, right? So you're basically following the same recipe, same amount of fillers, same amount of binders, same amount of waxes, but you're just changing the pigment to make the different colors. That would really expedite your production, right? Making things go faster. Well, okay, so now let's look at our Anil Swiss, right? I can say that I'm Swiss, you guys can't get away with this. No, I say that every time, but. So, you have 120 of each of these colors, right? Just to give you an idea of what a pain it is in production. You've got 76 of each of these assortments, right? Every single color in every one of these types of pencils has its own recipe of waxes to compensate for the hardness of the pigments in that particular pencil. And so, if you put the Luminox as the top surface, right? Unless this is in the window with the sun is coming from the back, if this is on the wall, the light is coming from this side, right? So the top layer is going to protect the underneath layers. The underneath layers don't really matter so much as far as light fastness goes. Now, if they're acidic and they break down or something like that's another story. But as far as strict light fastness goes, the top layer is the only one that's exposed to the light. So if you use Luminox, like these aren't cheap, the Luminox pencils, you know, and if you want to conserve and you're trying to, you know, keep your budget down, you can still buy Luminox pencils and use them, get the archival qualities. You know, you may not get as rich a layer as if you did the whole thing in Luminox or with Caran pencils. But if from an archival standpoint, if you use it as a top layer, it will, you know, it'll protect it. Just like, you know, I'm Swiss and I'm blonde and fair skinned. If I go in the sun, I'm gonna get fried. But if I put a sunscreen on, right, the upper level determines the light fastest underneath, right? So I won't get burned, and it's the same basic thing, right? So really great. Also, Luminox pencils. There's a thing called an Icarus board. It was developed by Esther Roy, who's this amazing color pencil artist. She came up with the idea, and her husband is mechanically inclined, I guess, Mario, and she had him develop this Icarus board for her, right? And basically what it is a heated element that's about the size of a big canvas, right? And it's a drawing board, and there's a heating element underneath it. You put your drawing paper on top of it, and you can do hot wax blends directly on the paper. She does these like jellyfish and corals and stuff that you'd never in a million years think it was done with color pencil. And she uses Luminox. Because of the wax content, it melts really nicely. You could also use Neocolor 1 or 2, and even our oil pastels, Neo pastels. They all work great on the Icarus board. It's like a hybrid of encaustics, right? If you would think of it that way. There are museums that are employing people to restore works of art, like watercolorings and so forth, and that were done because the guy saved $3-4 on a piece of paper. It's falling apart like an old newspaper 40 years later. And that piece of art may be worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, but the guy saved $4. And it's the same thing with oil paints, right? You use a cotton canvas and it'll fall apart, but if you use linen, spend an extra $30, 100 years later, it's still fine. Okay, so you have these oil paints, and they're on a frame, on a wooden frame, right? And in the summertime, when it's humid, that wood absorbs moisture, right? And it expands, right? Stretching that canvas. And then in the wintertime, when it gets dry and cold, it contracts, right? Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Right? And so it expands and contracts over years. And the oil paint that's very dry, it doesn't have anywhere to go, so it starts to split, right? And then as it gets looser on the frame, it starts to wobble this way, aggravating the situation even more. Well, an oil pastel never ever dries out, right? Never. So I put an oil pastel down on a piece of paper, right? You can see it's really nice and opaque too, right? And it will move with the support, right? So in addition to being extremely light fast, it also has a certain tensile strength, which makes it more archival from that aspect. So that's nice. The other thing is, you don't have to wait for one layer to dry before you can apply the next layer. So it gives people who want that basic effect the opportunity to do that, and it overcomes those challenges. But there's always going to be a compromise, right? 50 years, it never dries, that's why it remains flexible, right? But 50 years later, a drunk or an idiot or a kid, or a stupid drunk kid, come up and go and smear it, right? Just like a soft pastel. Well, that's not ideal, is it now? So what we have to do is we have to either put it behind glass, and it's a good idea to mat it so that if it sweats a little bit, it doesn't run, or make a mess. Or you put a fixative over it. Now, very few fixatives work on wax and oil pastel. They don't like to adhere to it. So there's a few that work good. There's one called Blair, which we manufacture at Creative Art Materials, right? And that one it's called a workable fix. Not the low water workable fix. That's great for color pencil, but it's not as good for oil and wax pastel. But the workable fix, you use that, and it's going to have like a matte finish, a little bit of tooth on it, so you can even go over it with it if you want. Again, that's why it's called a workable fix, because you can work over it. Then there's a brand from my hometown in Switzerland, which is Dietrich. There's a brand called Lasco. They're very well known for their acrylics. They make an excellent fixative that has kind of a semi-gloss finish. And then there's the Sennelier, which is very glossy, which would of course be appropriate because their pastels have that glossy finish. So it's a very well married fixative for their pastel, but it actually chemically it works really well with our oil pastels as well. So those three fixatives work excellent. Like I say, always test it to see which one you like. If you want more of a matte finish, go with the Blair. You want that semi-gloss, go with the Lasco. And if you want the glossier one, then go with the Sennelier. By the way, you can use oil pastels together with wax pastels to get even more opacity. But here's what you think. Here's the trick, right? How many of you guys have, or ladies have painted a bathroom or a kitchen before? And you know, like if it's somebody painted with oil before, right? What happens if you go over it with acrylic? It's going to peel right off. It's not going to adhere right? But if it's painted with acrylic and you go over it with oil, it's no issue, right? So it's the same thing here. If you use a wax pastel and go over with an oil, perfect, no problem. Vice versa, you're kind of like swimming upstream. It's not working really well, you know what I mean? So, but you can get even more. So I'm going to do it right here. And they'll work with the Neocolor 1 or the 2, but I prefer the 1 for this.
If you put the fixative on though, can you do?
Oh yeah, you could. Well, those fixatives I mentioned work on wax and oil pastel, so it's perfectly works fine, right? So now we'll put a little bit of Neocolor 1 down, right? And we're going to get into that here in a minute, of what else you can do with that. Now we're going to put this nice violet on there, or lilac, whatever that is. Now, then I can blend it with my fingertips, right? You get really, really rich, beautiful blends. You see that? You'll also notice that there's they're not bleeding, they're not leaking oils like other oil pastels. A lot of them, you know, they leak oil. It looks like you parked the old Triumph motorcycle over it, you know. They all leak oil. And they tell you not to run an old English motorcycle if it doesn't leak oil because it means it's run out, you know. So anyway, works really. So that works really nice, right? You could do graffito with them. It works great as a resist. In fact, I've seen people do like airbrushing techniques with an oil pastel and actually get photorealism with it. Now me, I'm a complete spaz. I can't get it together to do that. But I'm going to show you the basic principle behind it, right? So here I'll put along the edge here, like make believe this is cut into some interesting shape, and you know you can put this here, right? And now, oh yeah, look at the mirror here. What am I doing? I don't have to stand here like a dummy. I can sit like a dummy. All right, now see that? See what I'm saying? Yeah. Now that's just a very crude, quick thing, but there are guys that are doing this with great detail and using all different kinds of implements to rub that onto there and with great precision, and can really control that and get all kinds of depth, you know, with it. And
that was with the oil pastel.
That's the oil pastel, right? Now,
let's get about the full blender before we got enough that.
all right, cool.
The full blender you might look at.
Can you
We'll get
back
to
up
that.
just a second, though? A question for you mentioned earlier so that people aren't confused. You mentioned oil on linen, and you, at the same time you're talking about colored pencil. Just to be clear about that, between cotton paper that you would watercolor on and not linen.
Right.
Yeah, there's a big difference, and
I
just
was
don't
talking
get
about the
confused.
like
Yeah.
exactly like
Right.
the linen. We're talking about how important it is for something to be archival and
Right.
to last, and that, you know, the reason that we make these products the way we do, it's kind of like the reason that you would use linen, or you know, as opposed to cotton or good quality paper, as opposed to a cheap paper or like you know,
Right.
you want to use a good rag paper or something like that. It's because our products are very archival. They're all pH neutral. It's gonna make your work last longer. So what you're remembered for, you know, as an artist, you want your work to be remembered. You want it to be around long after you're gone, and that's kind of the attitude that we have and why we make the products the way that we do. You know, that's why we use the kind of pigments that are extremely light fast. We're very cautious about what kind of waxes that we use in our products and so forth. But you're absolutely right. Yeah, although you can use some of these products on linen,
Yeah.
you certainly can. Like the
Try the
super color
pastels.
pencils, you can use them on linen, and then you can iron them, and then they would
Like you would
can
a
use it for an
fabric.
underpainting, so that you can go over it with other wet mediums and things like that. Or if you just want that effect, you know, you can certainly use that. But mostly you'd be working on paper, but you can use it on both of these products, Super Color and Neocolor 2, on fabrics, on any kind of organic or natural fiber fabric, and then activate it with water and heat set it.
Yeah, but the same, if you're gonna spend the money on Caran like a museum, I would buy good paper.
Oh, absolutely.
Just makes sense. Right?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. It
Use
makes-
save the cheap paper for the cheap pencils.
You know, you're absolutely right. And another thing is, you know, the paper is every bit as important as the material you put on top of it. Because, you know, if you have a paper that doesn't have any sizing in it, and you can get vegan sizing if that's what you want, but usually it's made from boiled down animal bones, right? And that sizing keeps that pigment on the surface and shows off that pigment. Whereas if you use a cheap paper, it's just going to soak it in, and you could use the best pigment in the world, which in fact you would be, but you wouldn't necessarily see it because you're using a cheap support. So your point is well taken. Absolutely, always use the best paper that you can afford to use, and for, you know, linen as opposed to cotton and so forth. Now, I don't have much time left. We'll talk about Neocolor 2 real quick, and then we'll get into the because we have about 2 hours, but we want to use an hour for questioning. Right?
Questions and then have them try some of the stuff.
Right. But if it goes over 5 minutes. All right. So Neocolor 2 is a water-soluble crayon, right? You could use it like a watercolor. You could use it dry. You can use it for mono printing, where you draw on a piece of glass or plexiglass, and then you put a damp piece of watercolor paper on top of it, and bray it, and lift off 3 nice prints off it. You could draw on silk screens with it, and put a bead of golden silk screen media or jacquard color releaser over it, squeegee it down, and be able to get like 3 nice prints off of it. People use it for all kinds of stuff. They use it in body shops to mark bodies, car bodies, because they can just wipe it off after they make their cuts. People use it in upholstery shops. People use it in restaurants for daily specials, and then you can just wipe it off the board. People are keeping dart scores with it. There's a million industrial uses for Neocolor 2. Neocolor 1 is not water soluble, but it's much more light fast. You can do it in caustics with it. You can melt it with You can melt it, and you could use it to dye candles, like use it with paraffin or beeswax. You could use it for sgraffito, where you put the light colors down, dark colors on top of it, shave off the top layers. You could use it like an oil paint. You can use it with a solvent, and it'll react. It'll break down like it. You could even do mono printing with it. You would just use a solvent instead of water on your paper, right? So very, very versatile product. And then we have the blender. They come wrapped like this, right? You get 2 in a pack. They're woodless blenders. They are water resistant, and they're all product, so there's no wood, so you have way more product. If you use these together with, I'm going to use it with a museum, like Sue had just suggested a minute ago. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to put down a line. This is my favorite Prussian blue here, and you'll notice that it's a very matte-looking finish, right? When I put this blender on it, this is a little bit too pointy, it's going to really burnish it and give it a painterly quality. So it's changed the surface texture of your colored pencil, right?
Is that due to the water solubility?
Ah, good question. We're going to show you that in a second. And I promise I didn't pay her to say that. Now,
You could.
right? I could. 2 points. So now, watch. Here's exactly what's going to happen. Look, it acts as a resist.
Right.
And wherever I put this blender, it's going to increase the light fastness by at least 10%.
What is
With
it
everything
made
except
out of?
lumens.
What is the blender made out of?
Oh, it's made out of it's made out of the same types of wax technology that goes into Luminox, but it's a blend of different types of synthetic waxes.
Okay.
But they're water-resistant waxes. And in fact, I can put it down here, right, like that, and then go over it, and it'll resist it. See that? Yeah, a
You
little bit
find
more
you
water.
can't layer well once you've blended.
See how it resists right there?
Yeah.
So it's pretty. Obviously, you can use it when you're cross-hatching 2 colors to blend the colors together, and it'll work just as cool on a graphite pencil. Where is my graphite? Here.
Once you lay down the blender, though, it's hard to put another color on top.
Right. You wouldn't want to lay it down where you're gonna put water-based medium on top of it, unless you wanted to resist it. You would do it again, But here, look, it does the same thing with graphite. It really works great with graphite as well. See, look, watch. See that? It's a pretty dramatic difference, isn't it?
Yeah.
what it does, how it affects it. So that's kind of a neat thing. Yes, ma'am.
First question, do you use any animal products or byproducts?
No,
No.
no,
Also, do you provide?
and we don't do any animal testing.
Um,
Okay, the only animal testing we do is on ourselves. Now here, let's look at the pastel pencils. Pastel pencils are, however, a different animal altogether, just like chalk pastels, because these are almost pure pigment with just a little binder. Here we don't have that consistency of hardness, because otherwise it would no longer be a pastel pencil or a chalk pastel. So here we're much more dependent on the hardness of the natural, of the pigment that's being used in the first place, because we can't adjust the hardness without making it into a different medium. It would no longer be a pastel pencil or a cube, right? Right. But with all the other ones, like I said. Yes, ma'am.
I almost break the pencil off when I try and sharpen it, and have these little chunks of pencil.
Are you talking about the pastel pencils?
Any kind of colored pencil, mostly water-soluble ones. They break when you try and sharpen
What
it.
kind of sharpening is it? Because I've never had that issue.
Okay, you must have a better pencil sharpener.
Yeah, you know what? It's always good to use a good quality sharpener, like an M&R or a Coombe sharpener, or something, and hand sharpeners are much better than motor sharpeners. As far as, it's funny, I do these seminars for people who do use color pencils a lot, and some of them even glue old pencils on the back of the new pencils, so they could use it right down to the last nub. But then they'll use an electric sharpener and grind away 3/4 of the core. So I'm like, well, you know what? Why don't you just buy a little hand sharpener, and you won't waste the core. And like we have a Caran dot sharpener, right? It's a grinding sharpener. You use it like the old ones you use in school. But once it gets to a point, it doesn't sharpen anymore. So it stops itself. So if you got especially if you're a little kid who they're famous for going grinding away like half the pencil, it'll stop once it gets sharp. So that's kind of a cool thing. All right. Yes, sir. You had a question. 2. Go for it.
Do you make sharpness? Do you make sharpness in each material?
Yeah. Yes, they make different sharpeners for different materials. Absolutely.
Your company doesn't make.
Well, no, we don't make. We have sharpeners that we have made, but for instance, we also import M&R sharpeners, which are Mobius and Rupert. They're from Germany. There's one town in Germany where all the sharpening companies are made, and where they'll make all the sharpeners. Like Coombe are made in the same town, basically the other side of the block as the M&R. And if you look at the M&R sharpeners, some of them are made for pastels, like wax pastels. Some of them are made for, they'll show you in the catalog a diagram of the angle of the pencil itself. So if you want a shorter point, more of like this, you know what I mean? And some of them more like long points. And some of them are actually convex, where you're only taking away the wood and not taking away any of the core. And then some of them are convex, where it goes all the way to the point. So depending on the angle that you like, you can get the right sharpener. However, let's say for pastel pencils, Caran does make a sharpener for pastel pencils, and it retails for full retail is about $25, and we affectionately call it the potato peeler. It looks like an old school European potato peeler. It goes like the shape U, and then there's a blade in the middle. And because pastel pencils are best sharpened with a blade, because they're very fragile cores. It doesn't matter what brand they are; they're all fragile. These are less fragile than the others, but they're still fragile. In fact, we make them hexagonal so they don't roll off the table, right? And so these potato peelers, you can use it like that to just carve away the wood without touching the core. So you can get, you can use up all your pigment. Or you can pull it out like this and flip the blade around and have the blade facing you, and then you can kind of control to pull it this way. So that's like the best way to sharpen pastel pencils. And in fact, Sue, do you have a Caran catalog?
Yeah.
Can you turn it to the page of that sharpener, so if somebody comes up to you when they start to try stuff out, then you can show them what that sharpener looks like. So that's basic. Anybody else have a question? Yes, ma'am, and I'll get you in a second.
Is there any book you like that introduces
Yes, there's one called Caran Atelier, which is very good, except that they got the hardnesses wrong because the marketing guy wrote it. And then, but it's that one's very good. Then there's we have a technical product guide that I wrote, which is okay.
Are they on the web?
Yeah, you can get them on creativeartmaterials.com, and you can download the technical product guide. There are lots of great color pencil books. Christy Kutch wrote a couple that are very good. Denise Howard wrote one that's excellent. So there's lots of sources for color pencil techniques and so forth. Also, I did a demo on YouTube, for a customer, and it's called Caran Demonstration 2017. So you could see that. It's basically what we just did today, but shorter. So. Oh yeah, you had a question, and I'll get you.
Yeah.
Yes.
That silver pencil, carbon pencil?
Yeah?
you had, is that all carbon or is that?
Oh, this one right here, you mean?
Yeah.
This is a woodless. It's graphite, but it's a woodless graphite pencil, and it's all graphite. Yeah, there's no wood.
Okay, well, why don't they do that to the colored pencils?
No,
Oh, what?
you're like 18 times the cost.
We.
Wow, you could buy it anyway.
What?
Again?
I don't want to take out a loan for a pencil.
Oh,
What they do, there is a brand that does do that, but they don't use a whole lot. They're not very pigmented and not very light fast. We used to make museum pencils like that. The initial museums were just cores, and you had to buy a mechanical pencil for them. But people didn't like the idea of having to buy mechanical pencils for them, and so that we made the wood ones, and everybody seems to like them. So that's what the customers buy. So that's what we make.
no, and the other question was, is that silver one, the carbon one?
Oh, this is a blender.
No, the carbon one.
No, that's
Is
graphite,
that
not carbon.
Okay, graphite, is that water soluble?
This one is not water soluble. No, we do make a water soluble, but it's in the wood form. And we do have a carbon pencil, or charcoal pencil rather, not a carbon pencil, charcoal pencil, and that would be this one right here. And that's available in the graphite assortment in the open stock back there. Okay, ma'am, you had a question?
Yeah, I would like to do more mixed media, but I'd like an index of what works with what and what doesn't work with what. Is there a quick guide or a comprehensive kind of short?
You
form?
get my email at the end, and then you can ask me about that stuff. And in fact, we have data sheets that tell you what pigments are in what products and how light fast each color is. And one of the great things, if you like multimedia, Caran is really great in the sense that, like, let's say 070 in Neocolor 2 is scarlet red, and Supercolor and Pablo 070 is scarlet red. So it may be a different surface texture because it's different medium, but the color is the same. So let's say you use 240 lemon yellow, or 030 orange, or 159 Prussian blue, right? It's going to be the same from one product to the other. Now there are some products like Museum and Luminox where we now use newer pigments, because science has improved and newer pigments are available, and so you may have numbers like 640 or 720 and things like that, but even there they match each other among the premium ones. So if you're working with multimedia, you want to match those colors up perfectly, it's real simple. All you have to, because the number in the back, the last 3 digits, like Luminox is a 6901, which stands for the American Light Fastest Standard, ASTM 6901, right? So the prefix would be 6901 for Luminox. 001 would be white. So with Pablo, the prefix would be 666. The 001 would be the white, right? 388, the Supercolor. 3888, the prefix 388 is Supercolor. The 001 would be the white. So the white is always going to be 001. The black is going to be 009. The gray is going to be, from 003 to 007, depending which gray, and so forth and so on.
The 2-tip sizes in the brush, and this is a hard fiber.
And when
Do they come as a package or are they
Just-
separate?
They come separate and in a package. They're all out of all of them
just
right
want to
Oh,
stay,
They'll have them in again. I know.
so if you just want to stay
Hard
in like
detail,
a
real
straight line.
like a pencil line, and not have the fluidity. Yeah.
So
they
they're
come in a
out
set
of
for
these
you.
3 now.
Yeah. You'll have to give Darren a hard time about it, but they'll get them back in again.
Well, that was really cool. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Don't forget to check out part 2, which is an exclusive interview with Stefan Lohrer. We cover a lot of great ground on all these different supplies, so don't forget to check that out. I want to thank my friends Darren and Scott, the owners over at Wet Paint, for letting me come into their space, interact with their customers and people like Stefan, and also their great employees. Virginia hosted this particular event, and I want to thank her for being such a gracious host and letting me come in with my camera and talk to Stefan and others. Well, that's it for now. Don't forget to check out that part 2, that exclusive interview. You won't want to miss that. This is Marty for owingsart.com. Have a great day, everybody. Bye-bye.